If a crisis were to happen today with one of your parents or even a grandparent, someone you love that's aging, are you guys prepared for a crisis? Do you have the things in place that help prevent certain things from happening or make sure that certain things do happen? So, for example, if you find yourself in a crisis with an aging loved one, do they want a feeding tube? Do they want to be resuscitated? Do they want to be on life support? Just some things that are really important to know before you find yourself in a struggle, on the back of your heels trying to figure things out. Prepare, 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 and you'll still never be prepared for everything. But if you can have some of those basic things in place, have advanced directives in place, stating what they want. Do your parents or grandparents, the people that you love as they age, do those people have someone that they say, hey, you're my person? I'm an only child, so I was my parents' power of attorney. Maybe there's multiple siblings. Mom and dad, you need to choose who you want to be your power of attorney, not only for your kids' sakes, but for your sake as well. It protects the kids. It helps to decrease strife because everyone knows this is what mom and dad said they wanted, and they want Susie and or Joe or both to make sure that these things happen or don't happen. And kids, if your mom and dad do not have those things in place, have a chat with them. I get it. It's not a comfortable conversation, but we found out we were in a crisis. I already knew what they wanted in terms of the feeding tube. They didn't want a feeding tube. They didn't want to be resuscitated, and they did not want to be on life support. I did know that. We'd already had those discussions because I was in healthcare. And at the time, I've been a speech pathologist for years. The first 23 years, adults. And so I knew I would see this on the daily of families being caught off guard. But you always think, hey, that's going to happen to somebody else, or that's 20 years down the road. And then snap your fingers, daddy falls in the garage, breaks the hip, and we're on a spiral. It's things just can get out of hand so quickly. And when they're injured, whether that's like dad broke his hip, or someone has a stroke, or they have some degenerative disease like I don't know, MS or what's the other one? Parkinson's, where it's a progressive disease where they lose control. Typically, it's the things that happen quickly, like daddy breaking his hip, somebody having a stroke, or having a car accident, or, having a head injury, where they cognitively can no longer make decisions for themselves. What are you going to do as a family? Because I'm going to tell you, you're already stressed out enough. You're already trying to make sure daddy's okay, mom's okay, whomever it is, that everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing for them, while you try to be there, try to work some, and keep your own sanity. It's just a lot of balls that you're juggling. And the more check marks you have off of the list of here's what I want and here's what I don't want, the better off you will be as a family. Your parents will know that their wishes are going to be fulfilled by whomever they choose to be their POA, power of attorney. And it protects the kids from not having to decide. I was so grateful that I didn't have to make the decision for my parents. Hey, do they want a peg tube? Do I want to make sure they have a peg tube? I didn't have to. They decided they didn't want one. Still hard. It's still hard to watch them go through the things that they go through at certain points in the journey. But at least I didn't have to make that decision. I didn't have to decide that. So have all those things in place if you can. I hear almost on the daily from people that me, I still work part-time. So, when I see people at work or even at the grocery store, just running into people and chatting, a buddy of mine is going through that with a parent right now. And even though they had some things in place, there were things they didn't have in place, and they had to immediately take care of those things. Because if, let's say you get caught in a crisis, something happens suddenly and mom or dad cannot make those decisions any longer for themselves because they're no longer intact cognitively. when those decisions need to be made. So if you have a power of attorney and you know what they want, you know what those advance directives are, then that just helps tremendously relieve some of the stress from you. And then also just when they do become more aware, they know, hey, I'm so grateful we have those things in place. You know, Susie was able to take care of that, or Susie and Joe, or whomever it is that is put in charge of making sure that they're okay. Because if you find yourself in a crisis, what is it when we find ourselves in a crisis? It's typically, not always, but typically it's when it's sudden, right? It's a sudden event. So it's not like you've sat and pondered it for, 10 years or even 6 months. Maybe in the back of your mind, you thought, hey, I need to talk to my parents about this or about that. And you just keep putting it off because we don't want to think about them being incapacitated or not being able to make their own decisions or not being able to do their activities of daily living, whatever it is. Nobody wants to think about that. But unfortunately, for most of us, at some point, we're going to have an issue with something. Something's going to go awry. And if we don't have those things in place, what's going to happen is you might find yourself in the court systems, which takes forever. I think most people would agree it takes forever, trying to gain guardianship so that you can make sure their needs and wants are met, that you can manage and watch their finances so that people don't misuse their funds. And you will find yourself not only spending time in the court system, but also money. That if you would have just taken the time in advance to plan out everything as well as you can, you could have avoided that. And that's just way more stress that you don't want to have to be dealing with while your mom or dad are struggling with whatever it is, stroke, head injury, a fracture. And a lot of times when people fracture their hips and they're older and they go under anesthesia and they come out, sometimes they're a wackadoodle. They're not themselves, and it takes a minute for them to get back on track because it's just harder for some reason as they age with their brain. Doesn't mean that they can't come out of that, but sometimes that happens, and sometimes it takes people longer. So you just want to have those things in place. That's why we talk on this channel and this podcast, Generational Guardians Podcast. Prepare as much as you can. Can't always prepare for everything, but you can be prepared in some regard. I mean, even if they say, I don't want a PEG tube, then there are other topics to discuss around food. Well, what if you can't swallow as well and they want to put you on thickened liquids? Do you want thickened liquids, or do you just want to drink thin and roll the dice and live La Vida Loca? Because that's their choice. When I started out as a therapist at the rehab hospital, I was 23 years old. And I was going to save the world one patient at a time. I loved what I did. And I love the older population. And what's funny now is, I'm in my 50s. Anybody in their 50s at that time, when you're 23, they're the older population, right? But 50s to however old someone is, that I love working with them and always have. And I just remember thinking, man, I want to make a difference, want to make an impact. And I was young, and I had a couple of families that their family member failed the swallow study, and well, this is what we need to do, and they were like, well, mom's 90, we're just, and I was horrified the first time that a family told me that. I thought, oh, what are you doing? In my mind, I didn't say that out loud. I just made sure they knew the risks, and they were like, we're just going to let her eat. And, as I got older, even just a couple of years into doing it, and as my granny got older, I thought, yeah, I see that 100%. So they have to decide, do they want to take the risk of getting aspiration pneumonia and potentially dying from that? Or do they want to go the more conservative route and change the food texture, or maybe change the liquid consistencies, those kinds of things? So there are multiple things that you need to discuss and have in place so that when something does happen, and hopefully you never will have to even do it. Hopefully your people will live long, healthy lives and never have a hiccup. It'll be fantastic. But unfortunately for most of us, that doesn't happen. And we, as my buddy is finding out now, things happen in an instant. In the blink of an eye, your lives change. And sometimes a prognosis, you're like, okay, you're just in a tailspin. So anything that you can have in place ahead of time just helps everyone to kind of stay on track, try to, maintain some control of emotions. And not that should not be emotional, but I mean to the point that you can't function. You want to have your head on as straight as possible so that you can take care of them and make sure these things are taken care of. So get that POA in place. Let me know if you are a caregiver or if you have aging parents or grandparents. Do they have a POA? Do they have someone in place that will make sure what they want is taken care of and what they don't want is not imposed upon them because something wasn't put in place? Let me know in the comments. If you know your family has a POA, if you're a mom and dad in your 40s and 50s, have you thought about having a POA? I know it sounds like, what? I'm only 45. Why would I have a POA? Hopefully you'll never need it. But if something were to happen and that was in place and your kid's 20 years old in college and they don't have a clue what you want, but you have taken care of the POA, the advanced directives, everything is a legal binding document that says, I want this and I don't want that. What a relief for those kids that they don't have to make decisions guessing what you wanted. Because a lot of times what I've experienced with patients' families is a lot of times they do to their loved one what they want to happen. And it's not to harm the loved one. I don't mean it in that way, but maybe the loved one didn't want a peg tube. They're incapacitated, and now the family is saying, no, we want them to have a peg tube. And maybe they didn't have an advanced directive, and this is their POA. They can make that decision to give them a peg tube. And I've mentioned this lady before from my hometown. She married late in life, didn't have any kids. Her husband passed away. She, I believe, had a brain bleed. And they found her, I want to say it was 36, 38 hours later in her home. She did not die, but she had a brain bleed, hours, okay? She lived quite a while at the nursing home, couldn't talk, so she couldn't communicate on a peg tube, couldn't eat, and couldn't walk. Pretty much just bedridden. And I don't know, I just think, did she have anything in place? And maybe she did. Maybe she had something written somewhere that she wanted a peg tube. But I wonder if you could have asked her and known her answer to be true, if she would have stuck with that, knowing the situation she found herself in. To me, that's not living. You're alive, but there's a difference between being alive and living. So you really need to talk to your family and just hammer that out and iron that out. Again, my mom and dad did not want peg tubes. They did not want anything extended. Now, that doesn't mean if you had a car accident now, and we talked about this as a family, there's a car accident, we're in a short-term situation, maybe you're in a coma, but the doctors are like, we think they're going to come out of this. It's probably just going to be a week or maybe 2 weeks at the max. Then yes, let's do an NG tube, which is the tube in the nose or whatever, to make sure you're hydrated and being fed, getting the nourishment that you need. And yes, let's do therapy and all the things. But as they aged, my parents were like, do not give me a peg tube. So that's what I'm talking about. Just knowing, and there's nuances, right? But your family, and you just have to make sure those things are in place. So again, I appreciate you guys for watching. I love having these conversations. I love it when you make comments, ask questions. Check us out, Generational Guardians Community. I'll put a link. If you're a caregiver searching for some support, we'd love to see you on the inside. Check us out, see if it might be a good fit for you. Remember to always try and enjoy the journey, and we'll see you in the next one.